All right, so the question that came in about match concepts. So now after we've taught our players and got them thinking into taking away quarter of the field in terms of our deep and taking away the vertical routes deep, and we're thinking in quarters now versus cover three zones, we can now blend that into the match concepts, and you can run match lots of different ways. I'm just going to talk about one today that we've used, and that's tri-lock. And the concept of tri-lock is we're going to take away one receiver and designate one player to follow him around. So it's a nice transition from the zone principles to starting to incorporate match and a little bit more man-to-man look. By designating a lock defender, now we're creating 3 versus 2 situations to the field and to the boundary. So we're outnumbering the receivers in coverage, and we're still remaining +1. Okay, like I mentioned, we've taught that and instructed and taught that mindset of 4 deep zone defenders to limit the vertical passing game. So we're maintaining that advantage. And also the defender's technique and footwork are going to be very similar to the quarter skills that we just talked about, the shuffle technique and having the eyes inside and reading, being able to read in order to support the run game as well. So we're not teaching 2 different strategies. Obviously playing zone versus man, your individual techniques that your DBs require are going to be different. But by using these 2 schemes and concepts, the individual technique is very similar, as well as some of the reads, and we're getting the benefit of the zone and man concepts. So again, a lot of the benefits that quarters have, which I went through, but it also starts to limit some of the challenges. We can be a little bit more aggressive for throws to the flat as we're locking up with one defender that might remain in the flat and removing some of the area of the field that the other coverage defenders need to be responsible for. It also helps to limit the effectiveness of play action and the lack of coverage in underneath zones that sometimes we might face. Now, where the challenge is with playing match in this way, we play this tri-lock out of a read 2, or you might hear it referred to as palms, for instance. The cover 2 beaters can be susceptible, and I'll show a clip where we could be challenged a bit. If that outside quarter drives on the breaking route by number 2, then the corner route can be challenging for the number or for the free safety in order to get it over top of that vertical. So just to draw up kind of the scheme that we use here, and again, this is one variation. There's lots of different ways that you could run this, but our first player is our lock, and we use the field corner most often. Obviously, that's the longer throw. If the receiver is going to come inside, well, it's very important that we have somebody to account for that. We noticed that a lot of offenses that ran cover 3 beaters love that Z curl, and this is one way to take that away while still playing the zone principles in behind. So man everywhere he goes, or Meg, is our field corner in this case. So just looking at the field alone, we see that we have 3 defenders, the field half, the Sam, and the free, that are going to read what is the number 3 receiver that essentially becomes the number 2. We're ignoring the Z in this case, and now all of these 3 are going to match the route that is ran by the most inside receiver, and we have the Y that we'll respond to afterward. So there's our 3 versus 2 to the field. To the boundary side, we're incorporating it in the case where there's 2 receivers, so versus a 32 look. We have the boundary half and boundary corner that will be our leverage players deep, and our will that will, again, be the most inside receiver. We have a 3 versus 2 situation. We have the numbers in the passing game. With 1 back, we have our Mike becomes what we call the vertical hook player. So if that back releases and runs vertically down the middle of the field, that Mike is going to he becomes man-on-man coverage with the tail. If the tailback runs out to the flat, there are different ways that we can handle that. And we'll cover those rules here when we talk about our match principles. Just another quick variation as we've run this, I've used this as well. If that inside receiver, can be most often one of the more dangerous receivers that you'll see in high school, best athletes that have a lot of different spots now where they can run to. They can run to the corner, they can run the crossfield, deep post. So you might want to lock him up. We can do that with our free, and now our Sam, field half, and field corner are going to match number 1 and number 2. Okay, nothing changes here on the boundary, even though you you certainly could, and I'll show a clip where we do run a variation here. Our mic is still the vertical hook on the tail. Okay, now I did indicate here, because this is what we'll see in the clip. You could have your wheel be the inside leverage defender, okay, with our boundary half rotating over top, and the corner pinching in. Just another different look, another variation where it's difficult to read pre-snap as late as possible if you can help it, but it gives a different look, and you see that we take advantage of that in a moment. So these are the different reads for our inside and outside leverage players. So the number 1 and 2 are the receiver and the route concepts, and these, of course, might be more detailed and more specific, but generally we're going to get some type of these combinations. Our outside player is maintaining his outside leverage on the number 1, and our inside player maintains inside leverage on the number 2. If that number 2 were to run all the way across field, essentially what we're getting is 2 situations of match coverage to the field and to the boundary. So that inside player needs to make sure he goes completely the way that we run it. There are different ways where you can incorporate the free that reads from number 3 to number 2. But again, just kind of as an introduction, that's a more, I guess, complicated or detailed focus. Okay, with our curl player, he has a lot more variety in the things that he can do. Actually, sorry, I just want to go back because I forgot to mention. The second pattern that we see here is what becomes challenging for our our players in coverage, sorry. Okay. So when we get a vertical route by the number 1 and an outbreaking route by the number 2, our outside leverage player is going to try and carry that as long as possible before driving on the out by number 2. This is where it puts the inside leverage player in a bit of a bind, especially if the vertical receiver sees that and has the option route of turning that into the corner. That's a very difficult play for the inside leverage player to get over top of, but it's also a longer throw as well. So it is a chance. Again, you're not going to take away absolutely everything in your coverage, but we're trying to eliminate most opportunities, but there is the one cover 2 beater similarity where it becomes a challenge. Our curl player is going to read number 2 as well. If everything goes vertical, he's just continuing to get depth underneath and look for anything coming out from the middle inside out. If the number 1 hitches up or runs an in-breaking route, that curl player is going to drive and wall if it's a crosser, or come out to the number 1 if he sits. If the number 2 releases inside on that radical inside release, so there's a commonality, that curl player gets depth and can play underneath an in-breaking route at depth by number 1, help to make that throw a little higher. As we see, if the number 2 runs the outbreaking route, the curl is going to get depth and allow the outside leverage player to drive on that, which was drawn up on the last slide. Here's where the curl player and the vertical hook may switch off. If that running back, if the tail runs to the flat, we're going to get a push call from the vertical hook player who will replace the curl, and the curl just rallies to the flat. So there's some switch concepts there, and that makes it also easier to implement in your man coverage schemes.
Okay. Hey, Coach, this is amazing. Thank you. I've been trying to get some of this out to our social media as we go, the depth and detail here is incredible. And I know you kind of touched on it, and one of the points that I resonated the most with me has been you're talking about the quarters beaters being one of the answers of why you like tri-lock. And for me, it's the same. We would play a ton of quarters, and then we would get teams that would throw the field side stop, right? And I'm telling my corner, hey, like you essentially we're giving that up, right? If they want to throw it, and if they can throw it, we're giving it up. And having this tool in your back pocket to then be able to drive that with, a locked player, a guy, someone that's, as you said, man everywhere they go. That's I think one of the big points. I know a few people that I've talked through this concept with all kind of agree with that as well. Is there any like other route concepts, like from a big picture standpoint, that you really like tri-lock for as opposed to quarters? I guess I don't know if that's the best worded question, but like if quarters is your base, what route concepts would you really like tri-lock against?
Like I said, those quarter beaters, like the scissor concepts where we have downfield crossing routes, because now we're a little bit closer with our vertical defenders who are reading that number 2 two defender and know their leverage, they can latch on a little bit quicker downfield versus maybe a quarters where now they're exchanging and you don't know where essentially to go. Certainly, I like the tri-lock versus dagger routes where we might versus when we're playing quarters, somebody runs that dagger concept. If it doesn't get passed off correctly, then that can create that opening there. Versus a tri-lock where now once that player has declared vertical, our inside quarter is really going to ride him just all the way across the field. It becomes really man on deep downfield. So that's a good. I would probably go with those two right off the top of my head about where switching all of a sudden to tri-lock. If a team gets used to seeing quarters, you can take away those routes if they try and hit them a little bit later on.
Yeah, for sure. And just where we're going here, because we just had a bunch of new people kind of join in the last like 5-10 minutes. If you haven't yet, make sure you like the video because it helps more people. Some of those people may have had this shared with them or suggested through YouTube. It really helps us. If you're watching, if you're enjoying it, like the video because it'll help more coaches find it both now and down the road after we post it. So keep going, coach. This is awesome. And if we go a little bit long, that's cool. I know we started a little bit late. With yours as well. So this has been incredible stuff. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I just had, so I have some clips here to kind of show, the lockup here for, our tri-lock and match coverage, as well as just some variations that we run that I didn't drop. So I'll try and go through these fairly quick. I appreciate everyone's time here and need to squeeze in dinner in a moment. But anyways, so just hopefully while we were chatting there, if you read over what the responsibilities of the vertical hook are, essentially it becomes almost like man on the tail, but we can push that route or switch off that route with the curl player if the back releases outside. So that's the big key here. So this clip here, just the first one, kind of just a general overview. We'll see a really good job at the top of the screen by our inside leverage defender. So down here, we end up with trips. Now this is where your pre-scout comes into play. We get a lot of, versus this team, we saw their R or A, whatever you want to consider him. He would come in and just end up as a blocker, but he would also release downfield quite a bit. So we treated him as a receiver, which is why we stuck with our 3v2 rules versus a 22 look where the responsibilities become different. But as you'll see, he comes into the box a little bit late. So our curl player, which is our dime here, ends up just sticking in, and we have the lock here at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so I'll just kind of rewind a little bit close here. You'll notice that we're looking inside, so our field half at the bottom is looking inside, maintaining outside leverage. Our free is coming over to give him inside help in case we get a vertical inside release here. Our field corner is that lock player. He's not even looking at anything else. That's his responsibility no matter what. And our other players know that they have nothing to be concerned about with anything that the Z does. That's our field corner's responsibility. At the top of the screen, we see a great job, again, of inside leverage by our boundary half. They're trying to hit this post. He does a great job of keeping his leverage. Offensive coaches probably think that's a little bit of pass interference. Defensive coaches, absolutely not, as he has that right to the field. Receiver can't go through him. We also get a good head turn to follow the ball. This was his first year senior. Next year, he probably picks that off. Anyways, but just to emphasize that, especially with those inside quarter defenders or inside leverage defenders, it's critical that any inside breaking route, they need to carry that no matter what. They can't pass it off because the other side of the field has their own 3 versus 2 to consider. Here we're going to have a look at the underneath players. The vertical hook and our curl players doing a very good job of passing off routes. They try and run the mesh concept underneath. And actually, so the mesh concept, and speaking about tri-lock coverage and match principles, that can be challenging. We're seeing more and more of that implemented into offenses. But they do a really good job here. We see there are trips to the boundary. So here's our look versus 23. Our field corner is going to lock up. Our boundary half now becomes outside quarter leverage. Our free safety will be inside quarter, and we see our dime has tracked over to the boundary. That's how we played it. Again, different strategies. You can choose what works for you. At the top of the screen, we have our corner that will be our outside leverage. Our half will be inside leverage. They're both reading number 2, and what becomes our mic will be the curl player to the field in this situation. I think we're actually blitzing him. So we only end up with We're giving up the vertical hook player, so really this player becomes the curl. As we see, he's reading number 2 and he's releasing radically inside. This will allow our top 2 defenders to double the vertical by number 1. We're locked here. Our boundary half, slips. He falls a bit here, but fortunately, they're looking for this mesh route concept. And as we see players coming across the field, our dime and our what becomes our will just pass those on. We get a push, and we drive on the route underneath. So we're still taking care of the vertical routes. We actually end up with great numbers, doubling almost every vertical, and we're sound underneath defensively. Here's another example, this time versus quads. So we talked about having a lock player to create a 3 versus 2. Well, if the offense shows up in quads, we're just going to add an extra lock player. In this example, we HBO'd, so there's our boundary half, or what would normally be our boundary half. He's coming over. Whether you want him to take number 4 and you bump the Sam out, or if there's enough time to get him out on number 3, again, that's in your pre-scout, that's in your rules that you can designate to your players. I think in this case, because they line up in it, they don't motion to it. We were able to get him out on the number 3, who essentially becomes our read player. So just to kind of diagram that quickly here, as you'll watch, you'll see that the field corner is going to lock up on number 1. Our field half has bumped out. He's going to be locked up on the number 2 receiver. And now our read players become what was the number 3 and the number 4. These are the 2 players that we're matching using our dime, our halfback, boundary half that's come over, and our free safety. Get this out of the way. So now to accommodate for the quads, we're going to just lock up 2 players, and we end up with a 3v2. They try and throw the seam inside of that skinnier post, but we keep our inside leverage. Our curl player also does a nice job. Again, the number 1 hitches up, so he's just going to drive on that from inside out. That's covered off. We get that bracket. In case that route stayed more to the field side, we have our outside leverage defender that can help. He can try and get over and help out as best as possible. We're locked up here on the top. We see we do a good job of driving on that post route, maybe a little bit thrown behind, but we'll get those, we'll take that, and the pass is disrupted. I'm going to show you a situation here where we handle it well, but where if our read player where a vertical player, if he ran the corner route, it would be difficult for our inside leverage player to get over top of. We're also going to see where we bring a variation here. So we're bringing the free safety and we're bringing the will. We can bring 5-man pressure out of tri-lock. We're going to drop our field end. Now, again, your personnel, you have to figure out if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. I was very fortunate in the case where I had 2 ends that I was more than comfortable dropping into coverage. Both had linebacker experience as well, so that always helps. So I'll let it kind of roll through here. The throw ends up coming to the boundary, but we'll highlight the top of the screen in a second. So we get the pressure. We get a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly here. So let's start off with the good. Focusing at the top of the screen, our read player is really the number 3 receiver. So we get an out-breaking route. Our inside leverage player, our outside leverage player, my apologies, which is our field half, is going to hold the vertical as long as he can. Our dime has become the inside leverage player, replacing the free. So there's another situation where the free and the dime really work off of one another nicely as we're bringing the free on pressure. That outside leverage player is going to drive on the out-breaking route. Our D end is that curl player. Doesn't do a terrible job of getting out there into space. And we see the vertical here. Now, at this point, if this was to be a corner route and the quarterback had time, this becomes a real challenge for that inside quarter player to get over top of that and defend. So there's where the challenge is in playing the match or in tri-lock. Now, depending on what route you get from your lock player, if he stayed underneath, that corner is going to be there. But because we got some depth here, our lock corner might be able to get off of that and help out with the corner route in this situation once the ball's in the air. On the field side, this is where we bust. But again, the benefit of having 3 versus 2 is that at the very least, we're in man coverage down here where our half is driving on the vertical route. Our corner who is expecting help on this underneath. Really, our Mike should have rolled over to the boundary side and become the curl player and taken that inside breaking route. He kind of drops into that hole zone instead, or sits. We want that Mike to get underneath this in breaking route and replace the curl, which was the will that we brought in addition to the free. So that's the bad. We bust the coverage, but again, we're not in terrible shape because we're still matched up in numbers. We get the inside throw. There's the ugly. We drop the ball. That's why he's a DB, not a receiver. Drop ball, right? The very good, to finish off on a positive, you'll notice at the top of the screen, the outbreaking route turns into a wheel, and we run with it. That's an excellent point there. You know, always run with the wheel. I'll play it real time. So focusing at the top, the outbreaking route originally turns into a wheel. Our outside leverage player sticks with it. Here's another example of a variation, and I wish the film was from higher up. We're going to get a situation where we had scouted that this team liked to throw a lot of hitches early, especially at the beginning of the game. This is the first play of the game, so we're in our tri-lock call. We're going to pinch the corner. Instead of having him as our outside leverage defender and deep defender, we're going to send our will into as our inside leverage, and our boundary half becomes the outside leverage player. What this allows the corner to do is to sit on those hitches. And again, we get a drop ball situation here, but this is first play of the game. That really, I think, deterred them from going back to one of their favorite, or one of their favorite route combinations. Our corner is going to drive, and we see our will and our boundary half becomes those deeper quarter defenders. Our corner drives on the hitch, drops this one, but fortunately, I can't rip him too hard. He made 2 interceptions later in the game, 1 for a touchdown. But just a wrinkle that you can add into your match coverage responsibility as well. I think the final one here, again, just shows that versus the run game, we can still be stout, even though we think that, okay, by being +1 in our cover, we're going to be sacrificing versus the run. That's not necessarily the case. And again, because the benefit by playing off and having our receiver or having our coverage players' eyes upfield, we're able to read that handoff, read the triangle. We get a good kind of leverage from our DN that keeps outside leverage and helps to bubble that out. And now we're in good pursuit from our will and our half that is able to come up, leave his guy. We tackle him for a loss. So even in the tri-lock, just as much as quarters, we get that benefit and coverage in the run game as well. So kind of just to summarize and bring things together, why using a combination of this is important. Again, we get the benefits of zone and man coverage principles. Number 1, by interchanging our call from quarters to tri-lock. Probably maybe the most important, we discourage the vertical passing game, but we're still gap sound versus the run game, because we saw we can add up to 8 in the box even and still have 4 deep in coverage, depending on who your underneath defenders end up being. I like this because the individual technique for your players is very similar versus zone and man concepts, which are basically 2 different techniques. They can play these concepts and schemes, but maintain a pretty similar individual technique, which helps in your planning for indie drills and your players' understanding of what their roles are on the field. And finally, again, either coverage, it can look the same. So pre-snap, we want to make it as challenging as possible for the quarterback and the offense to read what it is that we're doing. If we can make things look the same and then drop into something else, whether it's different variations, pressure, whatever, 5-man pressure, whatever the case might be, exchanging who your depth defenders are and underneath defenders, well, again, that makes it challenging, and a defender ends up being where the quarterback doesn't expect them to. So there's kind of the summary of the benefits of using these in collaboration with one another. Again, just a contact there if there's any questions or would like to chat more about that. I know that was kind of pretty quick and just a base overview of using the 2 schemes together.
No, that was great, Coach. I think I got about 4 texts from guys saying, hey, like this is, such, a lot of them were familiar with the concepts already and just enjoying hearing you talk about it. But, the detail there, and I think the connections between the 2 is so important. Like, that's why we love it. Like, the summer program I coach with in Cambridge, we have similar influences. Obviously, me coming from Laurie as well with Coach Cam and Coach V. It's really, I've found, like, obviously you're gonna have your cover one stuff, and everyone's got to play some man. But like quarters and tri-lock has been the majority of our coverage menu, and like you said, having guys play in similar leverages and in similar techniques. But like the slide that I love the most was you moving around who the locked guy was. That's something we've done. Like some teams that play a fullback in the slot, we've said, hey, let's just man that guy up. We can cover that guy with our Sam. We don't need any help, to cover that guy. Let's play 3-on-2 on the outside instead of, playing 3-on-2 on the inside, or, being able to play that to a side because you're getting a lot of quick game. And, like you said, you're able to relate to those receivers down the field a little tighter because it's more like a match principle or man match principle as opposed to the zone of quarters. So really, really great job. There's no questions that have come up in the chat. There's been lots of, great conversation, just, basically people agreeing with a lot of the things that you said. There is one here, Pick Six Athletics, which is an account that we're going to do some work with soon. Do you find it more effective having a uniform pre-snap alignment or changing it up and having players moving around? I guess that's not specific, directly to quarters and tri-lock, but just defensively in general.
I guess one of the, I guess, kind of the benefits that I noted there is, for me, and again, there's no right or wrong, I like having as much uniform pre-snap as possible, regardless of what cover you're playing, whether it's, quarters, tri-lock, cover one, cover three, cover two even. The later that you can drop and show what you're doing pre-snap, the more difficult it becomes for an offense, I feel. You can also certainly intentionally show different looks, but then drop to the same coverage that you've been playing. That's all part of the chess game of coaching, I find. So for me, I find that I've been most successful when I've tried to keep the pre-snap picture the same, but then rotate into different spots. And certainly as you get into the higher levels, certainly obviously university and some of the better teams at high school and club ball, that might be more difficult to do because just their players are more skilled. As the skill level increases, there's going to be times where you just can't hold this one pre-snap look and then drop into something else. You're going to have to show it earlier just to put your guys in a position to be successful. So it really depends on, I guess, the competition that you're facing, and also the capability of your athletes. I've been very fortunate to have some really great secondaries and some individuals the last few years, many of whom have gone on or are going on into the U Sport level, or otherwise. And so that has made it very easy as a coach to try and do some of these things. But just a personal perspective, if I can make things look the same as much as possible, it's more difficult for the offense to get a read, since a lot of those things are coming more and more now pre-snap based on what what the defense is doing. The offense is going to make those calls. So the more that we can confuse them, the advantage we have after the snap, and we can just play football.
For sure. And I think you touched on some of this at the start, but is there a reason outside of personnel, like playing a 40 front or a 30 front, that you like for running quarters? Like, what's your main, like, why be a quarters based team?
It didn't have so much to do with our front personnel. Again, we were a 40 team just strictly because of the players that I had at D-line. That's something in the last year, in this time here, that I've actually, that's one of my, I guess, coach development tasks is to implement a 30 package more regularly, because I don't know what kind of athletes I'm going to be getting out of this situation when finally we can be back on the field, and I want to be prepared. So in terms of our D-line, it really had no influence. It was just the fact that I had 40 linemen, actually 5 or 60 linemen at any given time, that I was more than comfortable putting them on the field, which allowed me to do maybe more flexible things in our coverage. Even running a 30 personnel, if you're low on D linemen, you can still run quarters behind that, because now you can bring those, more athletic bodies, bring defensive backs from different spots in order to generate your pressure, but still be sounding coverage behind it. Again, I've switched over to quarters as a base and tri-lock in the last few years. Not so much based on personnel, just because I think you can run it with any personnel, and especially if You don't have the burners in the secondary to match up with the receivers. You're already putting them at an advantage of playing off, giving a little bit of cushion, and allowing them to see what's happening in front of them instead of trying to just be out athleted basically. So I think really it doesn't matter so much on your personnel. I think it can be ran no matter what personnel you have, and just using it correctly and not putting your guys in bad spots. Like I showed a couple clips of our DNs dropping into coverage. I knew they could do that because I've seen them play linebacker in different times and so on. But if I had DNs that just they weren't able to cover well, I don't know that I would use that as much. But ultimately, the scheme can still be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, coach. And again, thanks so much for your presentation and the coaches here, I think especially in Ontario, can echo that statement of, not being sure of exactly what you're going to have coming out of this. Now summer coaches, this will be 2 years. I have whole guys that I was excited for coming out of JV that I haven't played it. Well, we're able to do some stuff last summer and hopefully we will this summer too, but haven't played a real down in our uniform. Yeah. So I think the versatility is huge. Thanks again, coach. Really appreciate it. Guys, if you haven't yet, please like the video. It helps more people find it. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. We're a free resource for Canadian athletes and coaches. We're going to stay that way. Getting to 1,000 YouTube subscribers lets us monetize, and maybe we'll be able to afford a little more in terms of making some of our production stuff look a little bit better. But it'll help us out a ton if you help us out by subscribing, like the video. And we'll be back at 6 with a quarterback development session, and then 6:30 with a quarterback development session, and then 6 or 7:30 talking linebacker development with a guy I know that pretty well, Coach Smart, Coach Magicomo from Jacob Hespeler, another Laurier linebacker alum, and then we'll be doing our head coach roundtable at 8:30 Eastern. So thanks again, Coach. This has been great, and my phone's blowing up, so I appreciate it.
Thanks, Coach. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.